Donald Trump is panicking, and America deserves to know why. In the shadows of a federal courtroom, Ghislaine Maxwell just made a move so extreme it sent shockwaves through Trump's inner circle. And the fear coming from the White House right now is unmistakable. This isn't normal legal strategy. This is a signal, a threat, and a warning wrapped into one. And if the American people don't pay attention, the truth they're trying to bury may disappear forever. I need every single person listening to stop what you're doing and pay very close attention, because what unfolded in that federal courtroom is not some tabloid headline or celebrity distraction. It is a flashing red warning sign about the integrity of our justice system under President Trump, a sign that the powerful believe they can rewrite the rules in real time while the American people are kept in the dark. Before I walk you through exactly what happened and why it has the White House rattled, I want you to understand the stakes, because when someone like Ghislaine Maxwell makes a move this drastic, firing her attorney and choosing to represent herself at this stage, it does not happen in a vacuum. It happens because she believes she has leverage, and she believes the person sitting in the Oval Office will respond to that leverage. And that should alarm every American who believes in justice. Let's begin with the moment that sent shockwaves through the courthouse. Ghislaine Maxwell abruptly terminating her lawyer, David Oscar Marcus, and announcing that she would be filing her own writ of habeas corpus. Now, on the surface, that looks like a meltdown, the kind of chaotic behavior you see from defendants who are cornered. But anyone who's worked in federal law enforcement, anyone who has spent years watching defendants with powerful allies maneuver behind the scenes, knows this wasn't chaos. It was a strategy. It was a message. When you fire your legal team at the 11th hour, right before court records are scheduled to be unsealed under the Epstein File Transparency Act, records that allegedly contain flight logs, financial documents, communications, and names that the most powerful people in the world do not want exposed, you are doing it for one reason: to buy time. Time for whom? Time for what? Time for the only person with the authority to make this entire nightmare disappear with the stroke of a pen, President Trump. What Maxwell did today was not a legal filing. It was a signal flare. It was a reminder to the White House that she still holds secrets, and those secrets are valuable. It was a message written not in ink, but in leverage. I can protect you. I can protect your allies. I can keep the truth buried, but I need something in return. And if that sounds like a political thriller, it shouldn't. This is exactly how corruption works when it feels emboldened, when it believes no one is watching, or worse, when it believes no one can stop it. I need you to think about the context here. We are days away from a legally mandated deadline for the Department of Justice to release a trove of documents that have been sealed for years, documents that survivors and advocates have been fighting for relentlessly. Documents that may implicate individuals at the highest rungs of politics, finance, entertainment, and global power. And suddenly, Ghislaine Maxwell decides that her best chance at survival is to throw the legal system into disarray. She is representing herself not because she believes she can win. She is representing herself because chaos is her currency, and delay is her objective. And delay benefits one person most directly: President Trump, who has spent years cultivating an environment where loyalty is treated like currency and silence is rewarded like gold. If you've been watching closely, and I have, you will notice something else: the silence from the White House. When a defendant pulls a stunt this explosive, the President of the United States should say clearly and unequivocally that the justice system cannot be manipulated, that no one will be pardoned to protect the powerful, that transparency will prevail. But that is not what we are hearing. Instead, we are hearing nothing. And in politics, silence is not neutral. Silence is a choice. Silence is strategy. Silence is fear. So let's talk about fear, specifically the fear radiating out of the circles closest to the president right now. Because if Maxwell is truly acting alone, if she is not signaling to anyone in power, then her actions make no sense. But if she believes, or has been told, that a pardon could be on the table, suddenly everything snaps into focus. The timing makes sense. The firing makes sense. The chaos makes sense. Because we have seen this pattern before. We have seen allies, operatives, insiders telegraph their loyalty with public gestures. And we have seen this president reward that loyalty with pardons, commutations, and special treatment. But this would be different. This isn't a political ally or a campaign surrogate. This is a woman who helped facilitate one of the most horrific crimes imaginable, a woman tied to a network of wealthy men who believed they could prey on vulnerable girls without ever facing consequences. And now she is testing the system to see whether loyalty to those men is still more valuable than justice for those victims. And while she is testing the system, President Trump is failing it. Because any president who truly believed in transparency would be demanding the immediate release of those files. Any president who believed in accountability would be reassuring the American people that under no circumstances would a pardon be issued. Any president who believed in the rule of law would be strengthening public trust, not hiding in the shadows while his allies scramble behind the scenes. But that is not what is happening. And that is why America should be alarmed. Let me walk you through what Maxwell's new filing actually does, because it is not simply a procedural delay. It is a direct attempt to derail the timetable that would force the Department of Justice to comply with the Transparency Act. By firing her lawyer and filing pro-SE, Maxwell can now submit additional motions, objections, and procedural challenges that would normally be dismissed outright. Judges give leniency to self-represented defendants. That leniency becomes a weapon. It becomes a way to gum up the system, to slow the release of information, to buy days or weeks. And in Washington, a single day can be the difference between exposure and escape. So ask yourself, why now? Why at this exact moment, with this exact deadline approaching? Why, when the political climate is tense, when the president is under scrutiny, when the stakes for powerful men could not be higher? This is not random. This is not impulsive. This is calibrated. This is strategic. This is Maxwell telling President Trump, I will keep your secrets if you keep me safe. And if that does not send a chill through your spine.
My name's Brandon, and I'm with the Fred's Appliance sales team. Today we're going to be talking about induction cooking. What is induction cooking? Well,
Chill through your spine? It should, because it reveals just how fragile the line between justice and corruption has become under this administration. Now, I want to be clear, I am not here to speculate recklessly. I am here to lay out the facts that are already visible, the patterns we have already witnessed, and the behavior we are observing in real time. Because when the justice system is being manipulated, when a defendant with deep connections to powerful men attempts to bargain her way out of accountability, the American people deserve to know. And they deserve a president who will protect them, not his wealthy friends. But that is not what we have. We have a president who benefits from confusion, a president who thrives on chaos. A president who has shown again and again that he will use the tools of government to protect his own image, even if it undermines public trust. And right now, that president is watching as Ghislaine Maxwell attempts to rewrite the rules of justice in her favor. The only question is whether he will let her, or whether the American people will stand up, pay attention, and demand the transparency they were promised. Because what happens next will determine not just the outcome of one case, but the credibility of an entire system. And I promise you this, I am going to walk you through every single detail until the truth breaks through the smoke they are trying to create. When I look at what unfolded next, I want you to understand something very clearly, because this is where the cracks in the system stop being subtle and start becoming impossible to ignore. After Ghislaine Maxwell fired her attorney and threw the court into disarray, the reaction inside Washington was not calm, it was not measured, and it certainly was not the reaction of an administration confident in its own innocence. No, what we saw instead was a kind of frantic stillness, the kind you notice right before someone makes a move they know the public will never accept. And as I watched President Trump's advisors scramble behind the scenes, as surrogates began whispering to reporters to wait for all the facts, it became painfully obvious that this wasn't just about Maxwell anymore. This was about timing. This was about leverage. And this was about a sitting president facing the possibility that the darkest secrets of people within his orbit, people he has protected, elevated, surrounded himself with, might finally be forced into the light. And let me tell you, when a president behaves like a man afraid of sunlight, that is when the American people must pay attention. I spent enough years as a prosecutor to recognize the look of someone hoping the evidence stays in the dark, and that is exactly what we are dealing with here. Because the minute Maxwell filed her writ and demanded the court halt the release of the Epstein documents, the White House changed its posture. Suddenly, everything slowed down. Agencies that had been preparing statements went quiet. Officials who had insisted transparency was essential began saying they were reviewing procedures. And I want you to sit with this for a second. The President of the United States, who has never hesitated to comment on ongoing cases when it benefited him politically, refused to say a single word about whether he would rule out a pardon, not one. That silence was not caution. That silence was not respect for the judicial process. That silence was fear. It was the fear of a man who understands that Maxwell's secrets are not theoretical. They are real, documented, and tied to individuals who have enjoyed access to the highest levels of government, including his own. And when Maxwell signaled she was willing to weaponize those secrets to protect herself, the reaction from this administration was not outrage, not commitment to justice, but paralysis. You have to understand what that means. It means the president is more afraid of the truth than he is committed to accountability. And that is the difference between leadership and corruption. I have seen defendants panic before, but rarely have I seen the government panic with them. Yet that is precisely what we witnessed. Maxwell launched her delay tactic, and almost instantly, it was as if the entire executive branch became a locked room where staff whispered in corners, lawyers drafted memos no one wanted to sign, and everyone waited to see if Maxwell was bluffing, or if she really had the power to devastate careers, expose alliances, and unravel relationships that were never meant to survive public scrutiny. And while all this was happening, while the president's allies leaked vague assurances that a pardon wasn't being considered, not a single person would say it definitively was off the table. That intentional ambiguity is manipulation. It is how corrupt systems negotiate without appearing to negotiate. And I will tell you this as plainly as I can. A president who refuses to rule out a pardon for someone holding back evidence in a child exploitation scandal is a president who has abandoned moral authority. But more than that, he has abandoned you. Because when a leader protects the powerful at the expense of justice, the people who suffer are never the billionaires on private jets. It's the victims who waited years for accountability. It's the public who deserves the truth. It's our institutions, which cannot survive when presidents treat them like bargaining chips. And as this story unfolded, as the press tried to get answers, as families affected by the Epstein network begged for transparency, the president did the one thing that told the entire world exactly what he feared most. He said nothing. Silence is often more revealing than a confession. And that silence didn't come from uncertainty. It came from calculation. Because when a president refuses to answer the simplest question, should the truth be released? You have
Throw it as hard as you want. Go on. Watching it zip away feels like it might just keep going, right? Nope, here it comes.
You have to look at what he stands to lose. And in this case, the stakes for Donald Trump weren't political, they were personal. Every day those files remained sealed was another day he didn't have to explain old associations, old photographs, old favors, and old connections that he has spent years trying to distance himself from. And the truth is, when leaders are innocent, they demand transparency. When they are not, they find reasons to delay it. That is exactly what we saw unfolding. A deliberate strategy of avoidance designed not to protect the country, but to protect him. Because as Maxwell's maneuvering grew bolder, people inside the system, career officials, legal analysts, former prosecutors began asking the question the White House refused to touch. What does she know and who does it implicate? That question created a pressure Trump could feel, even if he never acknowledged it publicly. And instead of reassuring the country with clarity, he chose the one path that guaranteed more suspicion, more mistrust, and more fear. He hid from it. He acted as if silence could erase the pattern, a pattern of associates pardoned for loyalty, a pattern of allies shielded when scrutiny got too close, a pattern of treating justice not as a commitment, but as a tool he could pick up or put down depending on whether it helped him. And in that environment, Maxwell's sudden shift, firing her attorney, taking control of her own filings, signaling that she still had leverage, became more than a courtroom stunt. It became a negotiation, a test to see whether the president would step in to protect the powerful people who might be exposed if those files saw daylight. For her, it was a gamble. For Trump, it was a warning, and for the rest of us, it was proof of how fragile justice becomes when those in power decide that truth itself is a liability. Because let's be honest, if this were any other defendant in any other administration, the reaction would have been swift and unequivocal. You would have heard a firm statement from the president defending the independence of the courts, a demand that evidence be released, a promise that no one, no matter how wealthy, how connected, how politically useful, would evade accountability. But instead, what we saw was hesitation layered behind excuses. A White House pretending the issue was irrelevant while quietly monitoring every development. A president insisting he had no comment, even as Maxwell maneuvered in ways that only make sense if she believed someone powerful was watching closely. And here is what makes this moment so dangerous. Delay doesn't just slow down justice. Delay distorts it. It gives defendants time to manipulate the process. It gives the powerful time to coordinate their narratives. It gives presidents time to test whether the public is paying attention. And in this case, every day of silence gave Maxwell more reason to believe that her strategy was working, that the president was too invested in the outcome to risk speaking honestly. That is not how justice behaves. That is how compromised power behaves. And while Trump remained silent, others did not. Former federal officials began warning that these delays were not harmless procedural motions. Victims' advocates spoke out, reminding the country that every postponement meant prolonged suffering for the survivors who deserved closure. Members of Congress demanded answers about whether the White House was considering the unthinkable, a pardon to protect individuals whose names might appear in those files. And yet, through all of it, the president stayed quiet. Not because he respected the judicial process, but because acknowledging the problem meant acknowledging his own proximity to it. You see, when a president fears nothing, he addresses everything. But when a president fears the truth, he hides behind the walls of silence and distraction hope that the storm will pass. And that is exactly what he did. At rallies, he talked about unrelated victories. On social media, he shifted the conversation to entirely different scandals. His spokespeople repeated rehearsed lines about not commenting on ongoing legal matters. And all the while, Maxwell's filings stacked up, her strategy grew more obvious, and the White House grew more uneasy. Because the question looming over this entire case, the question the president could not bring himself to answer, is simple. Why would Ghislaine Maxwell, in the middle of one of the most consequential cases of the decade, suddenly feel confident enough to throw her legal team aside? Why would she believe she could drag the process out without consequence? Why would she think she could block the release of files that Americans have waited years to see? The answer, uncomfortable as it is, lies in the president's silence. Silence that signaled she still had leverage. Silence that implied she wasn't alone in wanting those documents sealed. Silence that told her the White House was watching, waiting, calculating, not because they supported transparency, but because they feared what transparency might reveal. And that
Gifts for the outdoors and the outdoorsy. Eddie Bauer.
Cozy up to the goodness of the new grilled cheese bacon burger. Angus beef, bacon, and Swiss and American cheese melting on a...
And that fear did not remain hidden for long. It spread through the administration like a current. Advisors rushed to craft talking points that said nothing. Allies in Congress tried to shift the narrative toward the politicization of the investigation. Attorneys close to the president examined the boundaries of executive clemency, whispering about hypothetical scenarios that no administration should ever entertain. This was not leadership. This was damage control. And as all of this played out, the American people were left with a haunting truth. When a president refuses to confront corruption, he becomes part of it. When he refuses to demand transparency, he signals that secrecy protects him. When he refuses to defend the victims, he defends the system that failed them. And that is why his silence matters, not just because it reveals fear, but because it reveals allegiance. An allegiance not to justice, not to survivors, not to the rule of law, but to the small circle of powerful individuals who benefit most when truth stays buried. That is why this moment demands our full attention, because silence from the president is not neutrality. It is permission, it is cover, it is protection for the very forces the justice system is supposed to expose. And when a president provides that protection, whether through active obstruction or calculated inaction, he is not simply failing to lead. He is helping to shield the truth from the people he was elected to serve. The fear radiating from this White House didn't fade, it intensified, because once Maxwell's filings hit the docket and the delay became official, the president and his closest advisors entered a posture I have seen only in moments when powerful people believe their secrets are in danger of becoming headlines. And that is why you saw this strange, sudden wave of deflection from the administration, statements about unrelated investigations, tweets about distractions, officials insisting they were focused on the future, as if the truth waiting in those sealed Epstein files were simply an inconvenient detail instead of a test of whether justice in this country still means anything at all. You see, when a president feels confident, he confronts a threat. When a president feels compromised, he avoids it. And Donald Trump avoided this topic with a caution he has never shown in any other case involving criminal allegations, national scandal, or political fallout. Not once did he say, "Let the truth come out." Not once did he say, "No one should receive special treatment." Not once did he reassure the American people that a pardon for someone blocking evidence in a child trafficking network was off the table. Instead, he created distance, publicly pretending the issue was beneath his attention, while privately, his staff scrambled to understand just how much damage Maxwell could do if she decided to speak instead of stall. And that silence, combined with the chaos Maxwell orchestrated, told us everything we needed to know. The president was not acting like a leader defending the integrity of our justice system. He was acting like a man hoping the legal clock would keep running until the danger passed. But here is the truth he doesn't want you to realize. Danger like this does not pass. Not when victims are still waiting for closure. Not when an entire country is waiting for answers. And not when a defendant is openly signaling that she knows she still has leverage. And what Maxwell was doing, with every filing, every delay, every procedural grenade she lobbed into that courtroom, was reminding the president that she knows exactly who benefited from the secrecy of that network and who would be devastated if the transparency law were enforced without interference. This is why Trump's allies began accusing the courts of overreach. This is why commentators aligned with him suddenly claimed that releasing decades of evidence might harm national unity. This is why advisors started floating trial balloons about reforming how the Department of Justice handles historic cases. These were not policy conversations. These were warning shots, attempts to construct a political argument that could justify an extraordinary abuse of presidential power if it became necessary. And when a president begins looking for language to excuse the inexcusable, that should alarm every person who believes in the rule of law. Because let's be clear, if a pardon were given before those files were released, it would not be mercy. It would be concealment. It would be a president choosing secrecy over truth, loyalty over justice, and self-preservation over the American people. And that is not strength. That is not leadership. That is fear masquerading as authority. And the danger of a fearful president is not only that he hesitates, it is that he acts when no one is looking. That is why this moment matters. That is why we must keep the pressure on, because transparency isn't just a political talking point. It is the very thing that keeps our democracy from decaying in silence. And if we allow delay tactics, procedural chaos, and whispered negotiations to undermine that transparency, then the damage won't stop with this case. It will spread. It will become a blueprint for every wealthy defendant who believes the justice system is a game of endurance rather than truth. Now, as we approach the end of this unfolding crisis, I want to speak directly to the people who have felt the weight of these revelations the most. The survivors whose lives were altered by Epstein and Maxwell's actions, the families who waited years to hear the truth, and the citizens who have watched their faith in institutions erode under leaders who refuse to honor the basic principles of accountability. You deserve better. You deserve a president who does not flinch when justice demands courage. You deserve leaders who do not hide behind ambiguity when the truth threatens powerful men. And you deserve a government that sees transparency not as a risk, but as a responsibility. What Maxwell is attempting to do is not sophisticated, it is desperate. What the president is doing is not neutrality, it is avoidance. And what we must do together is ensure that neither desperation nor avoidance becomes stronger than the justice that victims have waited too long to receive. So here is how I want to conclude this message, and I want you to hear me clearly. This story is not over unless we allow it to be. The truth is still sitting in those sealed files. The judge is still prepared to release them. The American people are still demanding transparency. And no president, no matter how afraid, how compromised, or how determined to shield himself from the fallout, can stop the truth if we make it clear that we are watching every move, every statement, every hesitation. Democracy does not fail when corrupt individuals act. Democracy fails when good people assume someone else will hold them accountable. So today, I am asking you not to look away. Share this message. Speak up. Support transparency. Demand answers. Because the moment we stop paying attention, the moment we fall silent, is the moment someone behind closed doors decides you are no longer watching, and that is when the deal gets done. But if we remain vigilant, if we make our voices impossible to ignore, then let me tell you something. No delay tactic, no procedural stunt, no whispered negotiation will be enough to bury the truth. And that is how we protect this country, not by trusting the powerful to restrain themselves, but by insisting that justice belongs to the people, not the privileged. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for refusing to surrender the rule of law to fear, corruption, or silence. Stay awake, stay engaged, and let's make sure the truth sees daylight, because that is the America we deserve.